Sometimes the poorest house reveals the richest heart. Grant Holloway said those words as he turned off the engine of his aging pickup truck and stared at the small weathered house sitting at the end of a cracked gravel road. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Tennessee countryside, casting long shadows across peeling paint, sagging porch steps, and a front yard that had not seen proper care in years. Nia Whitaker sat beside him in silence, looking through the windshield. For several seconds neither of them moved. The house looked nothing like the places Grant had shown her before. It looked nothing like the luxury towers, executive offices, and elegant restaurants that had quietly become part of their relationship over the past year. A loose shutter tapped softly against the side of the house in the evening breeze. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked in the distance. Grant finally took a breath. "This is it," he said quietly. Nia turned toward him. "What do you mean?" His eyes stayed fixed on the old house. "The company collapsed. The investments failed. The properties are gone. This is all I have left." The words sounded heavy, almost rehearsed. Nia searched his face for some sign that he was joking but found none. Grant looked older than usual in that moment. Tired. Defeated. As if the weight of a lifetime had settled onto his shoulders all at once. "I know this is not what you signed up for," he continued. "If this place scares you away, I will understand." The breeze moved through the tall grass around the property. A rusted mailbox leaned slightly to one side near the road. Grant waited for disappointment to appear in her eyes. He had spent years watching people react to money. He had watched friendships appear and disappear depending on financial circumstances. He had seen affection grow stronger when success arrived and vanish when challenges appeared. That was why he was here. That was why he had brought Nia to this forgotten corner of the state. He wanted to know the truth. He wanted to know whether the woman he loved cared about him or the life surrounding him. Nia slowly looked back toward the house. The porch needed repairs. The roof clearly needed attention. Several windows would have to be replaced. Yet she kept studying it with an expression Grant could not quite understand. Then she smiled. Not a forced smile. Not a polite smile. A genuine one. Grant blinked. It was the last reaction he expected. Before she could answer, "Let me know in the comments what you think she is about to say. And if you enjoy stories about character, second chances, and unexpected acts of kindness, make sure you subscribe for more." Grant's heart pounded harder than he wanted to admit. The answer mattered more than any business deal he had ever negotiated. Nia reached for the door handle and stepped out of the truck. Gravel crunched beneath her shoes. She walked toward the front gate and looked at the old house for another moment before turning back toward him. The golden sunlight touched her face as the evening sky deepened above the trees. Grant climbed out slowly and waited. Then Nia finally spoke. Her response was so unexpected, so simple, and so completely different from what he had prepared himself to hear that for a moment he forgot how to breathe. And standing there between the fading sunlight and the rundown house, Grant realized that the test he believed he was giving might already be changing him instead. Nia looked at the house for several more seconds before answering. The evening breeze moved gently through the tall grass surrounding the property. A few birds crossed the orange sky overhead while the last sunlight settled across the worn wooden porch. Then she smiled and said something Grant would remember for the rest of his life. "It needs work," she said. "But it is still a home." Grant stared at her. That was it. No anger. No panic. No disappointment. Just a simple observation. She walked toward the front steps and carefully tested one of the loose boards with her foot. "We should probably fix this first," she added. "Nobody needs to trip walking inside." Grant felt a strange knot tighten in his chest. For months he had imagined this moment ending differently. He had imagined confusion. He had imagined frustration. He had imagined her quietly walking away. Instead, she was already thinking about repairs. What Grant did not fully understand yet was that Nia Whitaker had spent most of her life learning how to see value where others only saw problems. She grew up in a small working-class neighborhood outside Memphis. Her mother worked long shifts as a nurse's assistant. Her grandfather repaired lawnmowers and old appliances from a tiny workshop behind the family home. Money was never abundant. Yet somehow there was always enough kindness to share. Nia learned early that dignity was not measured by square footage or bank accounts. Some of the happiest people she knew lived in modest homes. Some of the unhappiest people she met later in life lived behind expensive gates. As a community program coordinator, she spent her days helping families find resources, organizing local improvement projects, and supporting elderly residents who had nobody else to call. Her work rarely appeared in newspapers. It never attracted television cameras, but it mattered. She believed that deeply. Years earlier, after a severe storm damaged several homes in her neighborhood, Nia spent weekends helping elderly residents clear debris and repair fences. She did not do it because someone asked. She did it because she noticed people needed help. That habit followed her throughout adulthood. Wherever she went, she paid attention to people. Not their status. Not their wealth. People. Standing in front of the old house, she saw the same thing. She did not see failure. She did not see embarrassment. She saw possibilities. Grant followed her up the steps and unlocked the front door. The interior was modest. Dust covered several surfaces. The furniture was old but functional. A small living room opened into a compact kitchen. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting soft golden patterns across the floorboards. Nia walked slowly through the space, taking everything in. "The bones are good," she said. Grant almost laughed. The phrase sounded so natural coming from her that it felt as though she genuinely meant it. She opened a kitchen cabinet, checked a window latch, and looked around with quiet curiosity. There was no sign she was calculating what she had lost. No sign she was comparing this place to luxury penthouses or private jets. In fact, she seemed more interested in the condition of the water pipes than the condition of Grant's finances. As evening settled outside, warm light filled the small house. Grant watched her move through the rooms and felt increasingly unsettled. Not because anything was wrong, because everything was. The reaction he had expected never arrived. Instead, the woman he thought he was testing appeared completely unaffected by the loss of wealth he claimed to have suffered. And for the first time since creating this secret plan, Grant began to wonder if he truly understood Nia at all. The old house remained quiet around them, but somewhere deep inside, the foundation of his assumptions had already begun to crack. That night, after they finished exploring the house, Nia prepared a simple dinner using groceries she found in the small refrigerator and a few items she had brought with her from town. The meal was nothing extravagant. Vegetable soup, toasted bread, and iced tea served at an old wooden table near the kitchen window. Yet the quiet comfort of the evening felt strangely genuine. Outside, crickets filled the countryside with their steady chorus, while a soft breeze drifted through the partially opened windows. Grant watched her move comfortably through the small kitchen, and the more he observed, the less confident he became about the assumptions that had brought him there. For years, Grant Holloway had built his life around caution. Long before becoming one of the most successful real estate investors in the country, he had learned how quickly people changed when money entered the picture. Success brought attention. Attention brought admiration. Admiration often brought hidden motives. Over time, he had become skilled at recognizing when someone valued him and when someone valued access to his wealth. Unfortunately, that skill came with consequences. The more successful he became, the harder it became to trust anyone completely. Several relationships had ended because he could never shake the feeling that people saw the billionaire before they saw the man. Expensive gifts, exclusive events, luxury vacations, and media attention often attracted the wrong kind of interest. Some people fell in love with the lifestyle long before they knew anything meaningful about him. Those experiences left scars he rarely discussed. Then he met Nia. She was different from the beginning. Their first conversation had taken place at a community fundraising event in Nashville nearly 18 months earlier. While everyone else seemed eager to impress wealthy donors, Nia spent most of the evening helping volunteers organize supplies for local families. She barely noticed who the major sponsors were. When Grant introduced himself, she treated him with the same warmth and respect she showed everyone else. No special treatment. No excitement over his status. No attempt to impress him. At first, Grant found it refreshing. Later, he found it unsettling. Because the more he cared about her, the more he feared being wrong again. That fear eventually led him to create the test. The rundown house belonged to a small property he had quietly owned for years. His fortune remained intact. His companies remained successful. The collapse he described never happened. Every detail had been carefully planned to reveal what would happen if the wealth disappeared. Sitting across from Nia at the kitchen table, he expected to feel satisfaction watching the test unfold. Instead, he felt guilt. She laughed softly while describing a neighborhood project she hoped to launch later that year. Her eyes brightened as she talked about helping children gain access to after-school programs and tutoring opportunities. Not once did she ask about lost investments. Not once did she question what happened to his money. She seemed more concerned about whether the old plumbing would survive the winter. After dinner, Nia insisted on helping wash dishes. Together they stood beside the sink while darkness settled across the countryside outside. The small house felt warmer now, less abandoned, more alive. Grant dried a plate and glanced toward her. "You are handling all of this surprisingly well," he said. Nia smiled. "Life changes. People adapt." Her answer sounded simple, yet it carried the kind of wisdom that only comes from experience. Grant looked down at the dish towel in his hands. For the first time since beginning the test, a troubling question entered his mind. What if the person being measured was no longer Nia? What if every passing hour was exposing something about him instead? The thought lingered long after the dishes were put away and the house fell quiet for the night, waiting patiently in the darkness as the true challenge of the story slowly began to emerge. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and the scent of damp earth after a brief overnight rain. Grant woke earlier than usual and stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee. The old wooden boards creaked beneath his feet as he looked across the quiet property. Fields stretched beyond the gravel road, touched by soft morning light. For a few moments, everything felt peaceful. Then he noticed movement near the front yard. Nia was already outside. She stood beside the leaning mailbox with a small notebook in one hand, studying the property with the focus of someone preparing a plan. Grant watched from a distance as she walked slowly around the house. She examined broken fence posts, overgrown weeds, damaged gutters, and loose siding. Instead of looking discouraged, she seemed energized. By the time he joined her, she had filled several pages with notes. "What are you doing?" he asked. Nia smiled and handed him the notebook. "Making a list." Grant looked down. The pages contained repair ideas, supply estimates, and practical improvements. Fix porch steps. Clear drainage ditch. Repair fence. Paint exterior. Check roof flashing. Plant flowers near entrance. He stared at the list in disbelief. "You really want to do all this?" Nia shrugged. "If we are living here, why would we not make it better?" The answer sounded so obvious to her that she did not seem to understand why he looked surprised. Throughout the morning, she continued working. She cleared weeds around the porch, swept away years of dirt, and organized a pile of neglected tools she discovered in a small shed behind the house. Several neighbors passing along the road slowed their vehicles to watch. Few people had shown interest in the property for years. Around noon, an elderly man walking with a cane stopped near the fence. Nia greeted him immediately. Within minutes, she had learned his name was Walter Pierce, a retired military veteran who lived 3 houses away. His porch railing had recently broken, making it difficult for him to enter and leave safely. Grant listened as Walter spoke. The old man never complained, but the challenge was obvious. Nia nodded thoughtfully and asked a few questions. After Walter left, Grant expected her attention to return to their own property. Instead, she looked toward the neighboring house. "Maybe we can help him this weekend," she said. Grant blinked. "Help him? With the railing? We barely have enough work completed here." Nia smiled. "Exactly. We know what needs to be done." The simplicity of her reasoning left him speechless. Throughout the afternoon, more neighbors stopped by. Some introduced themselves. Others simply waved. Nia greeted every person warmly. She learned names, listened to stories, and offered help whenever possible. By sunset, she knew more about the community than Grant had learned during years of owning the property. Standing on the porch that evening, Grant watched children riding bicycles down the road while neighbors exchanged greetings across front yards. The neighborhood felt different somehow. Not because anything physical had changed yet, because Nia had already begun creating connections. She treated every person she met as though they mattered. Wealth never influenced her behavior. Status never determined her kindness. As the sky shifted from orange to deep blue, Grant realized the test was moving in a direction he never anticipated. He expected to discover whether Nia could live without luxury. Instead, he was discovering something far more valuable. Wherever she went, she made people feel seen. And slowly, without even trying, she was transforming an old forgotten house into the center of a community that had almost forgotten how much potential it still possessed. By the end of the first week, the old house no longer felt abandoned. It still needed repairs. The paint still peeled from several sections of the exterior walls. The roof still required attention before winter arrived. But something important had changed. Life had returned to the property. Every morning began with purpose. Nia organized tasks, prioritized repairs, and somehow managed to learn more about the neighborhood with each passing day. Grant found himself following her lead more often than he expected. One Saturday morning, they loaded lumber into the back of the pickup truck and drove to Walter Pierce's house. The elderly veteran had never directly asked for help. Nia simply remembered the broken porch railing and decided that remembering was enough. Walter looked genuinely surprised when they arrived. "You two do not need to spend your weekend doing this," he said. Nia smiled as she carried a bundle of materials toward the porch. "Maybe not," she replied. "But we can." For most of the afternoon, they worked beneath clear blue skies while neighbors occasionally stopped to watch. Grant helped install new supports while Nia painted sections of the repaired railing. Walter spent much of the day sitting nearby, sharing stories about his military service, his late wife, and the community as it existed decades earlier. Children riding bicycles slowed to wave. A young mother from down the road brought homemade lemonade. Before long, what started as a simple repair project felt more like a neighborhood gathering. Grant noticed something unusual. Nobody cared about wealth. Nobody cared about status. Nobody asked about business deals, investments, or private aircraft. People talked about gardens, families, weather, and helping one another. The conversations felt refreshingly honest. That evening, after returning home, Grant expected Nia to finally focus on their own growing list of repairs. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing a different set of notes. "What is that?" he asked. Nia hesitated briefly. "Just some ideas." Grant looked closer. The pages contained information about several local residents. An elderly widow whose roof leaked during storms. A single father struggling to maintain his property while working 2 jobs. A disabled resident who needed transportation assistance for medical appointments. Grant stared at the notes. "You have been collecting all this information?" Nia nodded. "People talk when someone listens." The answer lingered in the room. Over the following days, Grant began noticing small things. Nia quietly purchased groceries for one family after learning they were struggling financially. She arranged transportation for another resident without telling anyone. She spent an entire afternoon helping a local teenager complete scholarship applications for college. She never announced these actions. She never posted about them online. Most people never even knew she was involved. One afternoon, Grant returned from town carrying supplies for the house. As he entered the kitchen, he noticed several envelopes spread across the table. Financial records, bank statements, budget notes. Nia quickly gathered them together when she saw him. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Of course," she replied. Yet something about her expression seemed different. Not worried. Determined. Later that evening, while taking trash to the outdoor bin, Grant accidentally noticed a receipt lying near the top of the wastebasket. He recognized the amount immediately. Several $1,000s. The purchase had been made from Nia's personal savings account. His stomach tightened. They were supposedly living on limited resources now. Why would she spend that kind of money? More importantly, what had she spent it on? The question stayed with him long after sunset. Inside the house, warm light glowed through the windows while crickets filled the darkness beyond the porch. Grant sat quietly in the living room, staring toward the hallway where Nia had disappeared earlier. For the first time since the test began, genuine confusion replaced confidence. He believed he understood where the story was heading. Now he was no longer sure. Because whatever Nia was doing, she was keeping it hidden. And deep down, Grant suspected the truth would challenge everything he thought he had already learned about her. A week later, autumn settled more deeply across the Tennessee countryside. Cooler air drifted through the neighborhood each morning, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. The old house continued changing little by little. Fresh paint now covered the front porch railing. Flower boxes sat beneath repaired windows. The overgrown yard had been trimmed and organized. None of the improvements were dramatic on their own, yet together they transformed the property into something welcoming. Every evening as the sun lowered beyond the fields, warm golden light reflected from the windows and stretched across the gravel road. Grant often found himself sitting quietly on the porch after dinner, watching the neighborhood settle into the peaceful rhythm of small-town life. One evening he noticed children playing basketball at the end of the street. Another night he watched neighbors gather to share food on a nearby patio. The community felt connected in a way he rarely experienced in the world he came from. Expensive neighborhoods often had larger houses. They rarely had stronger relationships. Nia seemed to understand that instinctively. Wherever she went, people smiled. They waved when she passed. They stopped to talk. They trusted her. Yet what fascinated Grant most was not the attention she received. It was the attention she gave. She remembered names. She remembered birthdays. She remembered details from conversations that most people would forget within hours. One cloudy afternoon, Grant returned from a hardware store and found the house empty. A handwritten note rested on the kitchen counter. Gone to help a neighbor. Back soon. He smiled despite himself. The message felt entirely predictable. A few months earlier, the idea of spending an afternoon helping strangers would have seemed unusual to him. Now it felt normal because Nia had somehow made generosity look natural. Curious, he drove slowly through the neighborhood until he spotted her several streets away. She was standing beneath a large oak tree beside an aging pickup truck. Nearby stood Walter Pierce. Together they were unloading bags of soil and gardening supplies for an elderly widow who struggled to maintain her yard. Grant remained inside his vehicle for a moment, watching from a distance. Nobody knew he was there. Nobody was performing for an audience. There were no cameras, no social media posts, no publicity, just simple kindness. The realization lingered with him throughout the drive home. That evening, rain arrived shortly before sunset. Soft droplets tapped against the roof while gray clouds covered the sky. Inside, warm light filled the living room. Nia sat at the dining table reviewing paperwork while Grant watched the rain slide down the window panes. Neither spoke for several minutes. The quiet felt comfortable. Eventually Grant glanced toward the folder in front of her. Once again he noticed financial documents. Once again she gently closed them before he could see much. Planning something? He asked. Nia smiled without looking up. Maybe. Something expensive? Her smile widened slightly. Sometimes helping people costs money. The answer only deepened the mystery. Later that night, after Nia had gone to bed, Grant remained awake near the living room window. Rain continued falling outside. Reflections shimmered across the glass. The old house felt peaceful, safe, honest. He thought about the test. He thought about the lies required to create it. Most of all, he thought about the woman sleeping down the hallway. The more he learned about her, the less certain he became that he deserved the trust she gave so freely. The irony was impossible to ignore. He had built the entire situation to discover whether her character was genuine. Yet with every passing day, the answer became clearer. The real question now was whether his own character could withstand the truth waiting at the end of this story. And somewhere beyond the rain and darkness, that answer was moving steadily closer. The answer arrived on a cool Saturday morning nearly 3 weeks after they moved into the old house. Grant had driven into town early to pick up paint supplies and replacement hardware for several repairs they planned to finish before winter. The sky was bright and clear. Farmers were already working nearby fields. The entire community seemed alive with activity. When Grant stopped at the local hardware store, he noticed Walter Pierce speaking with the owner near the front counter. The elderly veteran smiled when he saw him. "You picked a good one," Walter said unexpectedly. Grant frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Walter chuckled. "That woman of yours." Before Grant could respond, the store owner joined the conversation. "Most people talk about helping. She actually does it." The comment immediately captured his attention. "What exactly has she been doing?" Walter and the owner exchanged surprised glances. It became clear they assumed he already knew. You really have no idea? Walter asked. Grant shook his head. For several moments neither man spoke. Then the store owner walked behind the counter and returned carrying a folder. You should probably see this. Curious, Grant opened it. Inside were invoices, receipts, and donation records connected to several recent community projects. New porch materials for an elderly widow. Wheelchair ramp repairs for a disabled resident. Educational supplies for local students. Emergency grocery assistance for several struggling families. Grant felt his stomach tighten as he reviewed the figures. The amounts were significant. Much larger than he expected. Who paid for all this? He asked quietly. Walter looked at him as though the answer should have been obvious. Nia. Grant stared at the documents. Every receipt carried the same payment information. Personal funds. Personal savings. No sponsors. No organizations. No grants. Nia had paid for everything herself. There must be some mistake, Grant said. She does not have that kind of money. The store owner smiled gently. She did. The words hit harder than Grant expected. One by one the details emerged. The savings Nia had accumulated for years. The money she planned to use for future goals. The financial cushion she carefully built through discipline and sacrifice. Instead of protecting it, she had quietly spent much of it helping people she barely knew. Not because anyone asked her to. Not because she expected recognition. Simply because she believed they needed help. Grant sat down slowly in a nearby chair. The realization washed over him in silence. He had spent weeks wondering about hidden expenses. Weeks trying to understand where the money was going. The truth was more extraordinary than anything he imagined. While he was pretending to be poor, Nia was willingly giving away resources she could barely afford to lose. Walter lowered his voice. She asked everyone not to tell you. Grant looked up. Why? She did not want anyone feeling embarrassed. The simplicity of the answer left him speechless. Later that afternoon, Grant drove home slowly. Every mile seemed to deepen the weight pressing against his conscience. When he arrived, he found Nia kneeling beside a flower bed near the porch, planting bulbs that would not bloom until spring. The afternoon sunlight illuminated her face as she worked. She looked happy, peaceful, entirely unaware of what he had discovered. For a long moment, Grant remained inside the truck watching her through the windshield. He thought about the lies, the test, the hidden fortune, the carefully constructed scenario designed to measure her character. Then he looked at the woman who had quietly spent her own savings helping strangers while believing the man she loved had lost everything. In that moment, the final illusion collapsed. The test was over. Nia had passed long ago. The person facing judgment now was Grant. And deep down, he knew the truth could not remain hidden much longer. Grant barely slept that night. Long after the lights inside the old house were turned off, he remained awake in the living room staring into the darkness. The soft ticking of a wall clock echoed through the quiet rooms. Outside, a cool wind moved through the trees. Every sound seemed sharper than usual. Every thought felt heavier. For weeks he had convinced himself that the test served a purpose. He told himself he needed certainty before giving someone his complete trust. He told himself caution was wisdom. Yet the discovery at the hardware store had shattered those justifications. Nia had done more than remain loyal when she believed his fortune was gone. She had sacrificed her own financial security to help complete strangers. She had given away resources she worked years to save while believing their future was uncertain. The contrast was impossible to ignore. She had responded to hardship with generosity. He had responded to love with suspicion. The realization followed him into the next morning. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows while Nia prepared breakfast. She hummed softly as she cooked. The simple sound filled the room with warmth. Grant watched her move around the kitchen and understood that delaying the truth any longer would only make his mistake worse. After breakfast, he asked if they could sit together on the porch. Nia smiled and carried 2 cups of coffee outside. The autumn air felt crisp and refreshing. Leaves drifted across the yard as they settled into a pair of old wooden chairs. For several moments neither spoke. Grant stared across the road while gathering the courage he should have found weeks earlier. Finally he took a deep breath. There is something I need to tell you. Nia immediately sensed the seriousness in his voice. Her expression softened. What is it? Grant looked down at his hands. For the first time in many years, he struggled to find the right words. Business negotiations had never intimidated him. Public speaking had never frightened him. Yet this conversation felt harder than any boardroom decision he had ever made. The company did not fail, he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Nia remained silent. Grant continued. The investments are fine. The businesses are still operating. I never lost my money. A breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Nia simply listened. The house is real, Grant said. But everything else was a test. He forced himself to meet her eyes. I wanted to know if you loved me or the life that came with me. The confession finally stood between them in its complete form. No excuses. No explanations. Just the truth. Nia looked toward the fields for several seconds. Her face revealed disappointment but not anger. That somehow made the moment harder. Grant felt his chest tighten. I know I had no right to do it, he said. I know I betrayed your trust. Nia slowly nodded. Then why did you? The question carried no accusation. Only genuine curiosity. Grant answered honestly. He told her about past relationships. He told her about betrayals. He told her about years spent questioning people's motives. He admitted that fear had influenced his choices more than wisdom. When he finished speaking, silence returned. The wind rustled through nearby trees. A pickup truck passed slowly down the road. Life continued around them while everything important seemed suspended in place. Then Nia surprised him once again. You know what hurts the most? She asked gently. Grant shook his head. That you thought money was the most important thing I saw when I looked at you. The word struck deeper than any criticism ever could. Grant lowered his eyes. She was right. The greatest mistake had never been the test itself. It was the assumption behind it. As sunlight illuminated the porch and the quiet neighborhood beyond, Grant realized that forgiveness was not something he deserved automatically. It was something he would have to earn. And the answer to whether that was possible rested entirely with the woman sitting beside him. For a long moment after her words settled between them, neither spoke. The autumn breeze moved gently across the porch, carrying the scent of pine and freshly cut grass from somewhere beyond the fields. Grant sat quietly, absorbing the truth of what Nia had said. She was right. The deepest wound was not the test itself. It was the belief behind it. Somewhere along the way, fear had convinced him that wealth would always stand between him and genuine love. Yet the woman sitting beside him had spent weeks proving exactly the opposite. Nia looked out across the yard where flower bulbs rested beneath the soil, waiting for spring. I understand why you were afraid, she said softly. Grant looked up. You do. She nodded. Fear makes people do strange things. Sometimes it makes them build walls when they should build trust. The simplicity of the statement carried more wisdom than any lecture could have. Grant felt emotion rise in his chest. I am sorry, he said. Not because the test failed. Because I failed you. Nia remained quiet for several seconds. Then she smiled sadly. You made a mistake. Grant waited. That does not mean it has to become the end of the story. The words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Not instant forgiveness. Not complete resolution. But something more meaningful. A chance. Over the following weeks, life continued in the small community. The old house kept improving. Grant finally revealed the truth about his finances to the neighbors who had become friends. Most laughed when they learned the full story. Walter Pierce laughed harder than anyone. Only a billionaire would pretend to be broke and accidentally learn common sense, he joked. The entire porch erupted with laughter. Even Grant joined in. For the first time, he could laugh at himself. More importantly, he could see how much he had changed. The house that began as a test slowly became something entirely different. It became a reminder. Every repaired board, every painted wall, every flower bed represented a lesson that money could never teach. One cool morning near the beginning of spring, Grant stood outside watching the first flowers emerge from the soil Nia had carefully planted months earlier. Bright colors appeared beside the porch, bringing life to a place that once seemed forgotten. Nia stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. Together they stood in comfortable silence. The fields beyond the road glowed beneath the morning sun. Birds moved through the clear blue sky. The neighborhood slowly awakened around them. Children waited for school buses. Neighbors waved from driveways. Life felt wonderfully ordinary. Grant glanced toward Nia. "You know," he said, "when I first brought you here, I thought this house would reveal who you really were." Nia smiled. "And what happened?" Grant looked across the property before answering. "It revealed who I was." Nia laughed softly. The sound blended with birdsong and the distant hum of morning activity. There was no dramatic celebration. No grand announcement. No need for one. Some victories arrive quietly. Months later, Grant established a permanent community foundation supporting the neighborhood and several surrounding towns. He named no buildings after himself. He requested no public recognition. Instead, he focused on creating opportunities for people who simply needed someone to believe in them. Nia continued leading projects, helping families, mentoring students, and building connections wherever she went. The difference was that now she had a partner who finally understood the value of what she saw so clearly all along. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, they sat together on the same porch where the truth had finally been spoken. Warm golden light covered the yard. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Nearby houses glowed with welcoming light. Grant reached for Nia's hand. She squeezed it gently. Neither felt the need to say much. The silence itself felt complete. Because in the end, the old rundown house had never been a test of love. It had been a lesson about character. And the richest thing either of them found there was not hidden in a bank account, a business empire, or a piece of property. It was trust, patiently rebuilt, standing strong beneath the quiet light of a new beginning.